Hello, and welcome to another episode of Public Relations Gone Wrong. There was a hijacking, and the hijackers were too numerous for the authorities to count, and they were successful without any weapons. In fact, the weapon of choice was a smartphone. It was the famous hijacking of the McDonald's hashtag McDStories. This hijacking cost the fast food giant a promotional sunk cost and ended up hurting its public image rather than building it up. The devastation of this hijacking could have been avoided if McDonald's strategic communicators had taken more time to analyze the intelligibility of their hashtag campaign. Now, in this presentation, I want to share with you essentially a little more details about this particular case, conduct an analysis of this particular discursive disaster based upon Habermas's theory of the communicative action, and also present some strategies for future avoidance, and then conclude with some remarks about how what we can learn from this as strategic communicators. You see, in January 2012, McDonald's paid to promote a hashtag on the Twitter homepage, hashtag McDStories, in order to inspire heartwarming stories about Happy Meals. But they pulled the hashtag within 2 hours as snarky comments and horror stories were told about the fast food giant. Essentially, it became a bashtag. Some of the tweets reported on the hashtag were shown as follows. For example, some of these hashtags are pretty harsh. The first one says, "I haven't been to McDonald's in 10 years because I'd rather eat my own diarrhea." Hashtag McDStories. Mark Rose posted, "Arranged a group of 14 folks to separately walk into McD's and then all walk out when they didn't have the McJordan sandwich." Hashtag McDStories. "At McDonald's scalds baby chicks alive for nuggets." Hashtag Meet the Reality, Hear and Take Action. McCruelty.com. Hashtag Unhappy Meal. McDonald's promotes the TT, hashtag McDStories, with hope of good promotion, but people are using the hashtag to tell horror stories about the food. And Eric Olson, in response to McDonald's hashtag, "When you make something with pride, people can taste it," Eric responds, "And by pride, do you mean eyeballs and ammonia? Yeah, people can taste it, all right." Now, you can only imagine what kind of problems this presented for the fast food giant, even though their hope was to build up positive stories about Happy Meals and the particular experiences that people have with them and fond memories. Now, briefly, as we analyze this particular snafu in the light of Habermas's theory of the communicative action, he defines a discourse analysis as the examination of the claim of discourse in a specific communication message. So we're just trying to look at what are they claiming in this particular message. And it's helpful in a circumstance when a communicative message has basically gone awry. Now, Habermas considers a communication message to be effective as long as it satisfies and is successful along 4 specific claims. The first one is intelligibility. The second one is truth. Thirdly, truthfulness. And fourthly, legitimacy. Now, I particularly believe that in this analysis of this hashtag, it was really lacking in the intelligibility and the truth side of things. Now, Habermas believes that if truth and truthfulness and intelligibility have been satisfied in terms of their claims, then legitimacy is very easy. Now, Habermas, in looking at intelligibility, he wants you to think about what did the sender intend to mean. So here in this scenario, McDonald's, they intended to mean that McDStories about your fond memories of getting a Happy Meal as a kid, or maybe some other positive memories surrounding this particular fast food practice. Now, the receivers interpreted the hashtag to mean, any stories about McDonald's. Now, I find that the barriers here to understanding and this lack of intelligibility in this hashtag, and hence the unfortunate surprise that the fast food giant suffered, was really resulting from its failure to understand the potential of all stories that can be told about McDonald's. You see, to say McDStories doesn't necessarily specify what kind of stories you're looking for, and therefore it doesn't necessarily lead to the actual stories and posts that McDonald's was hoping for. And so one of these barriers is just too generic of language. Also, the components of the message, stories, the truth of it, yeah, there's stories about McDonald's, but clearly the receivers, the audience, and those who are using social media via Twitter, they considered that there were more negative stories about McDonald's than there were positive stories. And thus they considered this hashtag to really be illegitimate, and they thought McDonald's was trying to build up publicity because they really understood that there were challenges. But in fact, they posted their hashtags, as we read, and essentially led the fast food giant to remove this hashtag to our continually trending on Twitter. Now, going forward to look at some strategies in the future of how we can better manage a scenario like this using Habermas's theory. First of all, we really need to focus on intelligibility. It really makes sense why this is the first claim that Habermas believes that you ought to satisfy. And the reason for that is if you go wrong here, the truth and the truthfulness is automatically out the window. No one can agree with what you're saying if they don't fully understand what you're saying. And nor can they really assess your sincerity in what you're trying to say if they don't understand what you're trying to say. So I see this as foundational. So in the future, as a strategic communicator, when you're doing these kind of social media campaigns, you have to be mindful of the generic terms like stories. Stories can be good and bad. They can be complimentary or condemning. Secondly, you have to consider what receivers might disagree with in terms of the intention of the hashtag or any particular public discourse that you're trying to display. You can't just take into consideration those who you feel are very supportive of your company or your brand, but you have to acknowledge that there are people out there who are not happy, and therefore you want to be very careful how you nuance it in terms of the wording and the intelligibility of it. Also, being aware of negative publicity that's possibly out there or floating around. It's very, very important that as we engage in our strategic communications, that we're aware of ways in which people can take these hashtags. And also not just look at people who are in favor of the brand, but who may be opposed to the brand. So ultimately, again, I really believe that this particular hijacking of McDonald's hashtag and turning it into a bashtag is really a classic case in Habermas's theory of communicative action and the importance of intelligibility and how it helps us to avoid such snafus, wasted money, and ultimately creating more negative equity with the public and the brand rather than building it back up. If we can continue to build off of this, I believe that as strategic communicators, we can find ourselves able to really understand where do we go wrong as we assess a public discourse that has gone awry, as well as be able to properly plan so that we can avoid such snafus in the future.